Welcome in to TYT's The Conversation. Long time no see. It is Adrienne Lawrence. Thank you for joining me today. And we are very grateful today to have Nabeeha Kazi Hutchins. She's the president and CEO of PAI. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Adrienne.
Now, Nabeeha, I understand that PAI works with policymakers in DC and your network of global partners really to advocate for accessible quality healthcare and also to advance sexual reproductive rights for women and girls and other vulnerable groups. And I think you guys are probably pretty jazzed right now, given the recent announcement that there's a $5 million grant from the World Bank's Global Financing Facility. That seems pretty huge. What's that grant for?
Yeah, we are excited about this grant from the Global Financing Facility. And the grant is simply for us to advance the voice of civil society and community organizations to ensure sexual and reproductive health and rights, to ensure that maternal health is thriving, and to ensure that young people, children, newborns have the kind of healthcare services that they need to thrive.
And I know that that's something that's extremely precious and valuable right now, especially considering that it seems that there are a number of healthcare rights that are potentially in jeopardy, which we'll get to a little bit later. But I'd love to talk and dive a little bit more into this grant opportunity. And I know that really since the inception in 2015, that the Global Financing Facility of the GFF has given grants and aided organizations really to strengthen civil society organizations. And during the pandemic, they really stepped up when it came for advocating for women and children and adolescents. Is that what made PAI an ideal partner?
Yeah, I think there are certainly many advantages of PAI having received this grant. One, of course, is that we have a 58-year history of being advocates. We advocate in the US and on the global stage to ensure that communities around the world have access to sexual and reproductive health and rights. And in addition to that, we've been working with 120 community-based organizations across 36 countries, so they can also elevate their voice and speak truth to power. So all of this, certainly our trajectory, the journey that we are on together with partners and being part of this global urgent movement to make sure that communities around the world can achieve their rights, can achieve healthcare, ultimately to achieve their aspirations. So it's a really exciting opportunity, especially in this time when we are very concerned about rights being eroded, where we are very concerned about bad policy taking shape that can harm people.
Absolutely, and that's something that a lot of us are focused on right now with that leaked decision on that could end up jeopardizing Roe v. Wade, as well as on a number of other civil liberties that really hang in the balance with that. And so I know that you all will take this grant and truly be able to uplift a lot of communities, largely in implementing the GFF's civil society and youth engagement strategy. And I know that's going to be implemented over the course of, I believe, about 5 years. Can you tell us a little bit about what the focus of those efforts are going to look like when they're carried out over this multi-year plan?
Yeah, so the initial work is over 2 years, but the 2-year mark builds on a previous commitment and previous catalyst funding from the Gates Foundation, actually. And this is really exciting because it shows that catalytic investments can make big impact and can actually bring civil society into a process that is appreciated and welcome by those who are setting policy, by those who are really interested in aligning their investments to the health and well-being of communities and to be highly responsive. So what does the grant do? What does it allow us to do as a global community? One, to lift our voices. As civil society, I always say we are the truth seekers and we are the truth speakers. And we hold government accountable, but what we're also finding, and certainly this was because of that investment from the Gates Foundation, is civil society advocates as partners to government. So over the next couple of years, it will be to support our advocacy, but also to support small organizations receive funding so they can carry on with advocacy, so they can advance the critical agenda items to ensure the right policies and the right investments are in place for their communities in their own countries and are able to achieve those priorities around health equity, around gender equality, ensuring that mothers don't die because they've given birth, ensuring that newborns and young children have the right nutrition so they can thrive and achieve, and so on and so forth. So it's a big remit, but it's all of us together. And I think ultimately the recognition that when we are working as a collective voice, when we bring many partners under this umbrella of this movement, around sexual and reproductive health and rights, we are stronger, we are better, and we can achieve and sustain progress.
And progress is definitely something we need right now, because it really seems to be reality that the US is backsliding on fundamental human rights. With this leaked opinion that essentially would overturn Roe v. Wade, as well as the progeny of law and legal precedent out there that could be tied up into that. And so is there anything that PAI is really doing in terms of seeing what it can use its resources and power in hopes of maybe ameliorating some of the pain that will come in the event that Roe and other human rights are truly gutted?
Absolutely, and the first piece I think it's worthy of recognition, and you've stated it, but it requires a reinforcement, is this potential overturning of Roe v. Wade, which is imminent, has a lot of implications. It will create disarray on the public health and humanitarian front in the US. It also disproportionately affects Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities here in the United States, who are already struggling to access contraceptives, who are already struggling to access essential cancer screenings and access, of course, safe abortions in their own communities. And you've put it so well in the past, is a policy or an action that is sexist in this country is also racist. Sexism and racism go hand in hand, and I'm quoting you on this. And that is certainly the case here in the US. I think the other piece to recognize is that 70% of Americans back abortion rights. And a minority here in the US is forcing their will on our aspirations and our achievements. They're not accounting for what the majority of Americans want. And banning abortion in the US does not mean it's the end of abortion. We know for a fact that women who seek out an abortion, people who seek out an abortion, are going to get one. What the banning does is it creates an environment where there's greater harm, where there's greater danger, where there are greater deaths as a result. Now, what are we doing as PAI? One, we are part of a global movement, and we are part of a US movement standing in solidarity to ensure that evidence comes forward, experience comes forward. We're not having a philosophical, values-based conversation. We're having a hard-hitting conversation on what are the implications and impact on communities in the US. And we're also watching very carefully and arming our partners around the world, because there is a danger that what happens in the US sets precedent for what could happen abroad. And we have seen countries move toward a trajectory of greater expansion of sexual and reproductive health and rights. The US is one of the countries, one of the few countries that is backsliding. And so we want to make sure that countries and communities that are moving forward have what they need to continue that advocacy, knowing that we are doing the same here in our own country.
Absolutely, and you really just took the words out of my mouth, because my next question was going to really touch upon the global footprint, because I know PAI is not something that just sits within borders, but wants to impact people on a global scale. And so the concern I definitely as well have is that people in other nations, other leaders, are going to see what the US does as somewhat of a leadership opportunity to go ahead and follow through and do exactly what they're doing. And it's very disheartening, considering, as you've noted, the vast majority of the American public does not care to overturn Roe v. Wade. And so it's not the will of the people as much as it is for those in power in the moment. And so in terms of what's next and what you are looking to achieve, even in the short term, we know you have this grant, and it's amazing, and I'm really excited for what you all are going to do with it. What other opportunities, what other avenues are you taking to uplift your goal and your mission?
Yeah, so aside from making sure we're building a strong ecosystem and we're part of a strong ecosystem of powerful voices that speak truth to power, we're also making sure that the right evidence and the right data comes through. We're also lifting up this hypocrisy, right? And the contradiction that on the one hand, the US on the global stage is advocating for human rights. We're advocating for gender equality. There are a lot of these commitments that are about making people's lives better, about recognizing that each as an individual should have equal rights and have access to what is fundamental to thrive. As we look to the spaces abroad and internationally, what we want to be doing is not only sharing the information and sharing the data, but coming together to lift our voices and make sure that our partners, 120 in 36 countries, have the resources and the tools to speak up and also feed us information. Because what happens abroad can serve as a powerful example of what we should be doing here in the US. And that at the end of the day is about the ecosystem. It's about advancing civic voice and civic space. And as I said before, it's about speaking truth to power, knowing that we have each other's back.
Yes, and that's something that we have to have, regardless of race, regardless of gender, sexual identity, orientation. It does not matter. We all have to work and fight together because democracy really, it hangs in the balance, or what semblance of democracy is out there, shall I say. But we really appreciate all of the work that you do and all the work you're going to do, especially with this grant in terms of making change in such a volatile time in our society where we see human rights are hanging in the balance, in part because we have the far right taking over so much. So I want to thank you so much again for the work that you're doing. And so if people want to get involved or to make a contribution or to learn more, where should they go?
They should go to pai.org. And there's information on how to make a donation so we can advance our voice, but there's also information on data, on action steps, on calls to action. So you can participate in many ways. But thank you for giving us the space, Adrienne, and for having me today.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us. And so for those out there who are wondering about how they can get involved with PAI, you just heard that information, but you have to remember, definitely they're working with policymakers in DC and a global network of partners really to advocate for accessible, quality health care and advance the sexual and reproductive rights of women, girls, and other vulnerable groups. And that is such an important thing to uplift right now. It does affect our entire society as a whole. So definitely get involved. And thank you so much for joining us. That's Nabeeha Kazi Hutchins, the president and CEO of PAI.